Several weeks ago, when we began our summer series in the book of Genesis, I warned you that there would be a couple of Sundays where some of you might feel a little left out. Now, I want to emphasize again that this is not just a series about marriage or singleness or about family and children, but those are subjects that we want to talk about together because they're important to each one of us. And so during the months of July and August, I know there are moments when some of you will feel a little twinge of sadness, maybe a little wishful thinking, and this morning it's my turn, it's Debbie and I's turn to feel a little bit left out. We want to deal with an issue this morning that actually cuts very close to home for a lot of individuals and a lot of families in the church and in our congregation, and some that you might not realize. Now, in one sense, this is strange because the central theme of the few verses we're going to read together in a few moments are actually laughter. Laughter is mentioned several times in our text. And so it's a happy text, but for some people, it brings a little tinge of sadness. When we were married, Debbie and I, exactly 40 years ago today, one of the things we had in common was our love for children. I already mentioned our work in summer camps, that was one of the things that drew us together, and Debbie's love for children is part of what led her to choose the profession that she chose. And from the beginning of our time together, we knew that we wanted to have children. There was a debate about whether we wanted 3 or 6 or 8 or 12, but we certainly knew that that was in our plans for ourselves. But the Lord had other plans. There was a painful string of 12 miscarriages, and the frustration that there was never any really solid reason that the doctors gave us why this wasn't happening. We just knew that we couldn't carry through to term. And then there was a failed adoption. Everything was ready, the lawyer was paid, we were all set, and the birth mother changed her mind just a few days after the birth. And another attempt at adoption that never quite materialized. And somehow, over the course of our years together, the empty nursery and our childlessness is one of the realities that we've accepted together. And unfortunately, truth be told, the church is not always an atmosphere that is comfortable for childless couples. When Debbie and I met in the church where we went in the East End, there was a group of us. We were about 30 or 40 young people, and it was neat. We had a college and careers group, and we went for dinner together. We had Bible studies together. We did sports together. We did all of these things together. And in the course of things, of course, as would happen when you have 30 or 40 young people that age in a church, we eventually started getting married. And there was a course of 3 summers. I think there was about 9 or 10 weddings over 3 summers. Everybody was just, they were just falling like flies when it started. And it was really cool because we were this gang of college and careers young people. We all went to CJEP together. We went to university together. We all got married. We all we bought our first homes together and renovated our first houses together and painted our first apartments together, and the friendships continued. But then the babies started to come for one couple and for another, but not for us. And then the second babies came, and the third babies came. And very gradually, we were less and less a part of the group that we'd always been friends with because they felt uncomfortable because they had children and we didn't. And so very naturally, Debbie and I migrated, and we ended up joining the older couples group that were all empty nesters because we were just empty nesters. And there were things in the church that always made this process a little bit more difficult. When you're going through miscarriages, you don't exactly advertise to the congregation that you've just survived another miscarriage together, and so people just make assumptions. I've lost track of the number of people in the church over the years who've approached Debbie and I and said, "Isn't it time you settled down and stopped living the selfish lifestyle and started trying to have a family?" And it was not my place at that point to tell them that we had just gone through miscarriage number 5 or number 6, and then we just had an adoption fail on us. We actually had a close friend of ours who had a miscarriage, and after people found out that she had a miscarriage, in an attempt to comfort her, they said, "It's not that bad. Most women have a miscarriage or 2. You'll go on to have another pregnancy and other children," failing to realize that the miscarriage had been dramatic enough that it caused an infection that had led to a surgery that meant that she would never, ever be a mother. But those aren't things that you advertise. And so certainly one of the things that Debbie and I have learned through the process is that as you watch other people live their lives around you, you don't make assumptions. You don't make assumptions about things that you don't know. And we all need to be careful about the very personal, private comments that we address to other people. And then part of the struggle for us is that during the 80s and 90s, when Debbie and I were struggling through miscarriages, the church was very strong about abortion, which is right. We believe that an abortion is a loss of a human life, is a loss of a child. And yet here we were, as we lost a child to miscarriage, we were never allowed to grieve for that child. One of the privileges that I've had as I worked at Mount Royal, there's a little corner in Mount Royal Cemetery called the Children's Garden. It's jointly sponsored by St. Justine and the Children's Hospital, and it is a place where parents can bury miscarried children and children who are stillborn, and I've had the opportunity to accompany families there several times. So given the struggles of many childless couples like us, and the longing desires many people have who've never been married to have children and it just doesn't seem to come, why deal with a happy text about a child being born? Well, we want to look at it because it's an important part of the biblical story. And actually, in the story of laughter this morning in the birth of a child, there's some comfort for those of us like Debbie and I for whom the child is still a longing that is there. I'm going to press one of our birthday girls into service this morning. Our sister Ruth Ann is going to come and read the scriptures for us. It's probably been a long time since you've been referred to as the birthday girl, I realize, Ruth Ann. I'm sorry. That was meant as a compliment.
Reading this morning from Genesis 21, verses 1 to 7. Let us open our ears and our hearts to his word. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. Well, I really don't have anything heavy, technical, theological for you this morning. I just want to draw out a few important lessons for three groups of people this morning. There are some of you who wish you were parents, and the text speaks to you. There's some of you who are parents and who need a little advice and a few reminders. The text is for you this morning. And there are a few this morning who are parents and you almost wish you weren't. And the text has a few things to say to you too this morning. And I want to just look at three very memorable lines in the text. One of the things that I deeply regret is that in the process of going through seminary, by the time I got there, I was old enough that I struggled with the Greek. I tried the Hebrew a little bit. I struggled with it, but really had a hard time. I regret that I'm not more familiar with the Hebrew because these three phrases we're going to look at, I'm told, are very beautiful and very poetic in the Hebrew. And I just want to draw them out for you. The first line that strikes us as soon as we begin chapter 21 is this strange expression. The text says that the Lord visited Sarah. It's particularly striking in the Hebrew because in the Old Testament there are 5 or 6 different ways that God is referred to. And when they're really serious about who God is, when they're really serious about his sacred, holy presence and the power of the Almighty being there, they use his personal name, Yahweh, Jehovah, and that's the name that's used here. There's a couple of other places in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, where there's an apparition. Sometimes we're told it's the angel of the Lord who comes to Abraham or to Moses. Sometimes we're told it's the host of the Lord's army who are there. And there's different ways that, but in this instance, the text wants us to understand clearly that this is not something that God has delegated. Yahweh, the Lord, Almighty, Jehovah himself does this. And it says that he visits Sarah. Yahweh comes for a visit. It's the same root of the word that's used repeatedly through Old Testament to describe what happens when people come to visit one another. Yahweh didn't send her a telegram. He didn't send her a letter. He didn't call her on the phone to tell her, I'm thinking about you. He didn't just send her good wishes from heaven. The same Father who becomes a father to the orphan and a provider for the widow is also the visitor of the childless woman. So let me begin by affirming to you this morning that God is not a distant stranger to your pain and to your longing. I don't know if what you're longing for is a child or something else, but God doesn't deal with that at a safe distance. God comes up close and personal. In one sense, I don't even need to invite you to speak to God about your unfulfilled longing because he knows it as he knew Sarah's. Because he came close and he visited Sarah. The same Yahweh who visited Sarah is as close to you as he was to her. The Lord, Yahweh, visited Sarah. The second striking line comes in verse 3. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Now, there's a couple of things wrong with this line. Abraham and Sarah struggled together with their childlessness for a long time. By the time Isaac is born, Abraham is 100 and Sarah is 90. They were 75 and 65 when God made the promise of giving them a son, and then the wait began. 25 long years before God fulfilled his promise to a son. Now, I don't know if you're feeling the biological time clock ticking and you're looking to get married, you're looking to have a child, and you feel like you're hitting your 20s and your 30s and your 40s. Abraham and Sarah can watch 190 come in and they're still waiting. And it's not just the clock that's ticking for Abraham and Sarah, it's the pages of the calendar that are ticking. It's the whole calendars that are flipping from one year to the next. Eventually, Abraham and Sarah thought, well, maybe we need to help God along. And Sarah suggested that Abraham have a one night stand with her maid, get her pregnant. Now, no matter how tempting it might seem, committing adultery on the side is never a wise solution to anything. It never solves any problems. It usually makes things worse. And so verse 3 insists, very interestingly, just with the passing line, that this little boy Isaac was the son that Sarah bore to Abraham. This is not the child from an illegitimate relationship with the maid to help things along. This is the child that he had with his wife, Sarah. Some of you have longings so deep that you're considering taking illegitimate steps to fulfill them. Some of you know very clearly that the scriptures speak very clearly against marrying someone who doesn't share your Christian faith. But you're so lonely, you're so longing to be a parent, that you'll consider having a relationship with anything that breathes just so you can get married, have a child, and fill that ache in your heart. And as Abraham and Sarah soon discovered, taking things into your own hands, taking a shortcut, soon winds up giving you more trouble than you had when you started. This memorable line in verse 1 also makes some observation that would have been offensive to the very patriarchal mindset of Abraham's day. When you read the Old Testament genealogies, there's something peculiar that happens with the masculine and the feminine. When you read the Old Testament genealogies, the wives and the mothers are usually not mentioned. It's a long list of Abraham begat Cain, and Cain begat the next one, and the next one begat the next one, and it's all in the masculine, it's all in the singular, and it's almost like if the women were just a passing thought on the side. But these verses insist that Abraham did not get this child by his own skill, by his own authority, and by his power alone. In fact, it says, this child, not a child that Abraham begat, this is a child that Sarah bore for him. And Abraham, actually, in the line, is completely in the passive process. Abraham, well, I was going to say he had nothing to do with this. He made a contribution because the son is his son, you understand. But he made a very small contribution at one point early on. But that's all that Abraham had to do with this. And God gave the son to Abraham and to Sarah. And then not only is it God's doing that this child comes, but when it's all over, God chooses the name. Now, in patriarchal Israel, in the Abrahamic covenant, as a father, as the man of the house, as the leader of your home, one of the great privileges you had is that you named your children. And when your firstborn son was born, you chose his name. Not this case. Abraham didn't even pick his son's name. God picked the name. Now, one of the key reasons why God decided to wait so long before giving Abraham and Sarah a child is that he wanted to be sure that Abraham and Sarah and everybody else would know and realize that the only reason this child was there was because of the sovereign providence of God, who can create life, who can resurrect life, who can bring fertility again to a man in his 90s and a woman in her late 80s, to his aging wife. Now, we think we've got biology and evolution and all those details figured out in our day. We think we have the power over life, but we don't. Debbie and I have had just great joy over the last number of months to watch these 4 little quadruplets growing. They were born in May last year. They were born premature. Their due date was August. They were born 4 or 5 months premature. And all 4 of them started in the respirator. And one of them took about 3 months to leave the respirator. And Debbie and I got a chance to see them in the hospital as they were growing. And I've got a picture of me the first time one of them's out of the incubator, and I got a chance to hold him. And I'm holding him against my shoulder, and my right hand is bigger than his whole body. I'm holding him like this, and there's 2 little legs, little head sticking out, just tiny. The 4 of them together, a birth weight under 5 kilos for all 4. And we've watched as the miracle of life has unfolded before us. And we think we're doing this on our own. We think this is our choice that we have a child when we have a child. Every child that is born, there's a miracle come from the hand of God. And one of the reasons God made Abraham and Sarah wait this long is he wanted Abraham and Sarah and everybody else to know that Isaac was a miracle from the sovereign grace of God, given in his time. To those of you who are already parents, it reminds you that you shouldn't take your children for granted as something that you have done without the intervention of God. Each new life that comes into the world with 10 toes and 10 fingers and working eyes and a brain that functions and lungs that breathe and the breath of life, each child is a gift from the hand of God that is entrusted to you by his grace and by his providence. But this also says something to you, to those of you who aren't parents, but wish that you were. It's a reminder that because each child is a miraculous blessing of God that comes from his gracious time in his own sovereign time on his schedule. When it is time for God to give you a child, that child will come. I want to point out just one more memorable line in the text. And I like this one because in a way that only the Hebrew does, there's 3 levels. We have an expression in English. We talk about a double entendre. It's actually a French expression. But it's when there's a phrase that means 2 things. And actually, this last phrase that I really like, it actually means 3 things at the same time. Sarah rejoices at the birth of her little one. And in verse 6, she says, God has made laughter for me. Works on 3 levels. In one sense, Sarah's a little embarrassed as she speaks it because she remembers back many years ago when God promised to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a child. Sarah is hiding in the tent and she's overhearing the conversation between Abraham and the angel of the Lord and the promise that they're going to have a child. And we're told that Sarah's now, she's listening in on her conversation. Ladies, I don't know if you listen in on your husband's conversations, but that's a discussion for another day. But Sarah's overhearing Abraham, and she hears this promise, and Sarah laughs, and the text says she like, when she hears, Sarah goes, yeah, right. Do you have any idea how old I am? Do you have any idea how long it's been since that was even possible? And even Abraham, as he's knelt before God, it says as he's knelt before God, he chuckles inside, he laughs. And so when Sarah says that God made laughter for them, it's a little embarrassing because Sarah says, when we first heard this, we started to laugh, and everybody else who hears it is laughing. Imagine Abraham and Sarah when they bring their little boy to daycare with their walker and their cane, I don't know who did the math homework. When your little one was doing math and you think you can't do the math because it's been 15 or 20 years since you've been out of school, imagine Abraham trying to figure out the new math as he sits with Isaac doing his homework. Imagine what that looked like, playing catch in the backyard when you're 100 and your little guy's 2 and 3. So there's laughter there because it's a reminder to Abraham and to Sarah that they need to be very, very humble about this because God has given them a grace and a provision in His grace that they have not deserved. And there's laughter and this embarrassment at the impossibility of this. But this is how God responds, often bringing about things that in human terms we never thought would happen. Now, the second level on which this works is that Isaac's name, Isaac, means laughter. So when Sarah says, God made laughter for me, she's literally saying, God made this little boy. It's not my doing. It's not me. If God had not been here doing this child, this little boy would not be here. So when Sarah says, God has made laughter for me, she's also saying, God has woven this little boy intricately in my womb in the process that only He knows, miraculously, graciously, and here's this little boy. And then the third sense, of course, in which the line works, it speaks of the indescribable joy that old Sarah and Abraham had when they finally held this little boy full of the promise of God. My father-in-law was a very, very wise man. When Debbie was growing up, from the time they were very, very little, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every summer holiday, my father-in-law would say, we have to go visit the grandparents. We have to go visit the grandparents. We have to go visit the grandparents. And the kids go, okay, let's go visit the grandparents. Right? And sometimes they wondered, why my father-in-law? And then they realized, because one day my father-in-law became the grandfather. But for 20 years, and he trusted his kids, when the little one comes, you go and visit the grandparents. You go and visit the grandparents. Now, I got to tell you, in our family on both sides, we've had the privilege of getting to 4 generations. And it's kind of cool, isn't it, when the first great-grandchild is born and you bring it home to the great-grandparents and you watch the smile on their face when you handle the... Imagine Abraham and Sarah. It's not their great-grandson they're holding. It's their little boy. It's their little Isaac. It's this child full of promise. And God had made joy and laughter for them. We have this image of God as a cranky old guy in heaven giving us commands and telling us what to do and what not to do. And we have completely the wrong idea of God. God made laughter and joy for Abraham and for Sarah. He doesn't ask us to follow His path because He wants to see us suffering under His will and struggling to keep His commands and unhappy. Much to the contrary, God wants what's best for us. And as He brings about what's best for us, at moments that includes fulfilling the longings and the desires of our heart that He's given us with laughter and with joy. And their little boy was not only an answer to their prayer with joy and with laughter, but that little boy was the child of the promise. Through Isaac, through Jacob, through the 12 patriarchs would come the promised fulfillment of the Messiah. This little child wasn't just important for Abraham and Sarah, he was an important part of God's plan unfolding. This thought is really kind of neatly brought forward by the opening lines of Psalm 37. I want to go there with you for a couple of minutes because I think this is a psalm that's often taken out of context. Psalm 37 begins this way. I think we've got it for you posted on the PowerPoint. Psalm 37, Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Do the right thing. Listen to the commandments of the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. We have these normal, legitimate longings. And sometimes we're tempted to take shortcuts, to take it into our own hands, to make it happen by our own power. And our desires for children and for marriage and for that good job, they become so powerful in our lives that they become our only focus, and they become like an idol. And we get to the point where we would do anything to find that spouse. We would do anything to have that baby. We would do anything to have that good job. And we cut all of the corners. But God makes a promise in verse 4 that as we delight ourselves in the Lord, He grants us the desires of our heart. This is not the prosperity gospel. This doesn't say name it and claim it and it's yours. This doesn't say go out and dream a little and visit the nice houses in Westmount with the 3 BMWs in the driveway and think about it hard enough and desire it. And this is not what this is saying. This is saying make the Lord your delight. Serve Him, follow after Him, listen to His word, pattern your life after His instructions, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Over 35 years ago, just 5 or 6 years after we were married, we were still in the process of trying to figure out the pregnancies and the miscarriages. And almost on a whim, Debbie and I registered for a class to become foster parents. And almost accidentally along the way, we hadn't even completed the course. There was an emergency that came up, and we were asked to care for 2 little ones. It was an emergency. And there was a newborn baby who was just 3 months old, and his little 7-year-old sister. And at that point, we thought it was just a short-term emergency placement to help a family in crisis. And normally when you do emergency foster care like this, the children are with you for a week or 2 weeks or 3 months or 4 months, then they go back to their mom, and they disappear, and you never see them again. And little did we know that 35 years later, these 2 little ones would still be a part of our lives. And they've had children and made us grandparents now. And there have been others. There have been other foster placements. And then there's countless other children through Debbie's work in class, through our work together in camp, and through our work now in the community. One of the most fun things that Debbie does every year, because she's been a teacher, you know that little project we do with Dr. Julien with the school bags. Debbie's been in the classroom for 38 years. She knows what kind of markers work, what kind of sharpeners are the best. She knows what kind of Kleenexes box collect. She knows all of this. And so when we do this together, this is one of the things that Debbie looks forward to during the year. A couple times during the summer, I think starting in April or May, Debbie almost looks forward to this more than Christmas. She goes, we're doing that school bag thing again, right? When's that? And then in May, we're doing that again about a week ago. So, when's the school bag thing? Is it coming up? Because this is one of her joys. As long as we focused on us, and on the children that we wanted, and on the way we wanted to be parents, and how we would raise our children, and how much pride we would take in our children, we were missing the fact that there was a bigger picture of other children in whose lives God wanted us involved. We had an interesting little moment a couple of weeks ago after Debbie had been shopping with a couple of our little granddaughters, and one of our foster girls, who's now become a grown woman and has children of her own, and in this off comment with Debbie in a conversation, she said, you know, I don't know where I'd be without you guys. And Debbie came home and we both had the same thought. And we told this little girl, we don't know where we would be without you, without the joy that the Lord's brought into our hearts. Debbie and I are still technically, biologically childless. But we know exactly what Sarah meant when she said that the Lord had made laughter for her in the life of an unexpected child who's been a grace and a provision for her. As you struggle this morning with the deep unmet longing in your heart, I wonder whether you will trust the Lord enough to look to His wisdom and to His grace. Take your eyes off you and look to Him. Trust in the things that He might have for you that might be so much better by far than the things that you had planned for yourself. Maybe God's calling you this morning to something much deeper, much more significant, and much more joyful than you've ever imagined. Don't take the tempting shortcuts. Wait for the Lord's time. Wait for the Lord's guidance. Remember the powerful words of Psalm 37. Delight yourself in the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Let's pray. Father, we confess that in the depths of our longing, the shortcuts become very tempting. Father, help us to keep our eyes on you, to trust in your provision, your loving care, your steadfast love, and your grace. Father, I pray this morning for my brothers and sisters who are carrying heavy longings and unmet desires, that they would know the laughter that you made for Sarah and for Abraham. In Christ's name, amen.